Good morning, and we want to say happy Wednesday to everyone. We're delighted to have you with us. My name is Mariellen, and I am the Technical Advisor for Creative Associates Center for Migration and Economic Stabilization, and I will be moderating this discussion. I believe that if we were to pause for a moment, nearly everyone who is part of this webinar can think of a way that migration has touched their lives. Migration is a human right, and it's responsible for progress across the globe. What preoccupies us is irregular migration, which is when people undertake risky and traumatic journeys to go and live and work abroad without a reasonable legal option to do so. And as development professionals, we're concerned with the context that makes undertaking this risky and traumatic journey an option for individuals. Several years ago, Creative Associates came to SID to talk about the why behind people's decisions to irregularly migrate. And since that time, our ongoing research and others' work have identified key aspects that drive irregular migration at the international, national, community, and family and individual levels. For example, in Guatemala, Duke University and the Brookings Institute has dubbed Huehuetenango, which is a department in the Western Highlands of Guatemala, as an epicenter for irregular migration. And our research has corresponded with this in terms of seeing that people of Mayan descent are statistically significantly likely to have lower incomes, less likely to have access to financial products, and are more vulnerable to adverse events related to natural disasters and climate change. And in El Salvador, in the context of a precipitous drop in homicides, we have seen that in our most recent study that the motivations for irregular migration are related to economic reasons for doing so. And finally, we know that youth are overrepresented in irregular migration. And in our work in Honduras, we found that youth are at higher risk for irregular migration due to their stage, their life cycle stage, where they're taking on new economic responsibilities and changing their roles in family structures. So as you can see, we have considerable knowledge of the why behind irregular migration. What we want to do here is unpack the how. How are we working to address irregular migration at the local level? And what we are going to do first is gain some insight on effective approaches for working in high out migration areas in Guatemala and the Western Highlands with Sara Barker, who is the chief of party of Tejiendo Paz and has been working on USAID programming in Guatemala since 2015. Next, we're going to talk with Wendy Fernandez, who is in El Salvador and who is the founder and director of Association for Salvadorian Women, ARDEMUSA in Spanish, and hear about how she has derived and unpacked an innovative program for economic empowerment of women in El Salvador. And finally, we're going to round out our conversation with Adelina Vásquez, who is the director of the Center for Human Development, CENTRO in Spanish. And Adelina is going to focus her talk on their decades-long work with youth and youth networks in Honduras. And what I hope to do to facilitate your participation is to pause at the end of each one of these amazing speakers' presentations to open the floor for questions and answers. So if you could chat to me, Mariellen, I will put the questions together and help to keep time. And without that, I would like to pass the mic, if you will, over to Sara Barker.
Great, thank you, Mariellen. So the Peace Building Project, or Tejiendo Paz in Spanish, focuses on reducing social conflict and strengthening social cohesion in the predominantly indigenous Western Highlands of Guatemala. The core component of the project is working with 134 communities in 15 municipalities to identify sources of conflict as well as potential solutions. The municipalities are located throughout the departments of San Marcos, Huehuetenango, Quiché, and Totonicapan. We work in some semi-urban areas, but most of the communities are rural. The majority of the communities are largely indigenous, specifically Mayamam, Quiché, and Ixchil, although some of the communities are non-Indigenous depending on the municipality. The municipalities and communities were originally selected through a participatory process with civil society and government representatives that looked at 3 criteria: the presence of conflict and vulnerability, social and political will, and finally, potential and opportunities for impact. During implementation, the project has had the flexibility to include additional communities within those 15 municipalities where there are high levels of emerging social conflict. What we mean by social conflict in the context of the Western Highlands are latent but persistent conflicts within and between communities that may have not yet escalated into serious violence, but have the potential to do so and ultimately undermine the overall development in the Western Highlands. These conflicts can be related to gender, youth, and families, land, governance, and natural resources. And this is why focusing on increasing social cohesion, which means a degree of connectiveness, sense of ownership, and solidarity between groups in society, is so important. Using a participatory analysis, dialogue, and planning process, communities identify local conflicts, take collective decisions on their own peace-building priorities, and devise strategies to advance them. This process results in a community action plan, which we call community visions. Once the community vision has been developed, we then work with communities to implement their priority actions. We do this through local grantees, strategic alliances, and connecting communities with government institutions and other resources. Through sustained and constructive interaction, communities improve their understanding of sources of conflict and resilience, they build trust, and they restore or strengthen relationships. And this ultimately increases community resilience. We don't arrive with a strictly set agenda or with already designed solutions. The ideas of the community visions place local communities in the lead to set priorities, design responses, and drive implementation. And the inclusion of Indigenous communities in the development and implementation of these community visions is at the heart of the Peace Building Project. So I want to share a couple of examples so you get an idea of what locally led conflict mitigation looks like in the Western Highlands. For example, in a community in Chiantla, Wewetenango, the community water pump had been installed by a previous municipal administration, but had not been properly hooked up to electricity. So when community leaders approached the region's electricity provider, the company accused them of operating the pump illegally and fined them an amount they couldn't pay. So the Peace Building Project, in this process of developing their community vision, supported community leaders in negotiating with the energy company and obtained a significant reduction of the fine. The electricity was turned on and families now have water coming directly into their homes to clean, drink, and cook. Another example is in the municipality of Comitancillo in San Marcos. Communities identified interfamilial violence as a priority conflict. And in response, the project worked with local leaders to develop institutional protocols to report abuse and violence against children. Local institutions collectively developed a community reporting route to link services from different government entities, such as the Attorney General, Police, and Public Health Center. Once the reporting route was created, it was then presented and validated by municipal and community authorities. The final document was then printed for distribution. Information has been shared during other project activities with educators in schools, and a radio spot discussing the route was developed and disseminated. So all that being said, I would like to share the perspective of 2 Guatemalans, a young member of a youth network that the project supports, and a representative of a local organization that works with returnees.
Can you all hear my video? No? Okay. Can people hear me now and see the video? Okay. How about now? Lovely. Thank you, everyone.
Hola, mi nombre es Ana Cristina Toma, yo soy de la aldea Vichibalá del municipio de San Juan del Cutzal, del departamento del Quiché. Yo soy estudiante de trabajo social en la Universidad de Rafael Landívar. También formo parte de la red de voceros y voceras juveniles para la paz del Instituto Demos. Y también soy promotora comunitaria de grupos de autogestión en las comunidades de Vichibalá y Santa Adelina del mismo municipio de San Juan del Cutzal. Yo considero que los factores que hacen que un joven se quede en su lugar de origen está la familia, la educación y la sociedad. La familia porque el apoyo que ellos le dan, porque a un joven se le trata con ese cariño, con ese apoyo emocional, y en la educación porque es que se refuerce la educación para que despertar el interés de los jóvenes de hacer otras actividades. Y la sociedad porque si ellos sienten ese apoyo y esa inclusión, pues ellos no tienen un motivo para irse. Y para reforzar los factores que hacen que un joven se quede dentro de su comunidad, está el fortalecer los espacios donde ellos se involucran. Y estos espacios son la religión, la familia, la educación y la sociedad donde ellos permanecen. Y un ejemplo de esto, puedo agarrar la red donde estoy involucrada, que es la red de voceros y voceras para la paz, en donde no hacen distinción de los jóvenes, se involucran a todos y fortalecen conocimientos diversos. Las razones que tiene un joven para migrar, pues está la violencia intrafamiliar, la exclusión social, el estatus económico que le ofrece su familia. Y también hay jóvenes que se juntan a temprana edad y por lo que empiezan a tener hijos y empieza como que una presión para proveer, y como tienen poca educación, pues tienen poca oportunidad laboral, por lo que su única opción o lo único que piensan ellos es buscar otra oportunidad en otro lugar, y eso es migrar, ¿verdad? Lo que yo hago para permanecer en mi comunidad, no migrar, es yo estudio los sábados y viajo 4 horas a la universidad porque voy a hacer trabajo social. Y lo voy a hacer porque quiero apoyar a mi comunidad, porque quiero un lugar mejor para los jóvenes. Y lo que hago actualmente para apoyarlos es, yo me desempeño como promotora comunitaria en mi comunidad y en otra comunidad cercana, donde empodero a mujeres. Principalmente yo quiero ser un ejemplo, quiero que los jóvenes entiendan que aquí hay vida, que aquí uno puede sobrevivir, y quiero que digan, yo sí puedo porque ella pudo.
And we have one more testimonial as well.
Buen día para todos. Mi nombre es Delia Catú, soy maya cachiquel, laboro en la asociación POPNOG. En la asociación POPNOG acompañamos el retorno y reintegración de niños y niñas y adolescentes retornados de Estados Unidos a Guatemala a sus comunidades de origen. ¿Cuáles son los factores que determinen para que las familias y personas permanezcan en sus comunidades? Una de ellas pues es contar con servicios básicos, que es el tema de salud, el tema de educación, el tema del empleo. ¿Cómo podemos hacer eso? ¿Cómo se puede fortalecer de lo que ya está? El tema educativo es que haya escuelas que mucho más cercanas a las comunidades, porque hay comunidades donde no cuentan una escuela, tienen que ir a otra comunidad y eso implica de mucho tiempo, 2 a 3 horas. El tema de salud, deben de contar sí cuentan con un centro de salud, pero no cuentan con un médico, no cuentan muchas veces con una enfermera y no se cuenta muchas veces con el tema de medicinas. no hay medicinas. En el tema del gobierno local debe implementar acciones y debe tener en su plan de gobierno esta parte del tema de migración, contar con presupuestos. ¿Cuáles son esos factores en los cuales la persona que no logró llegar a su destino y vuelve a su comunidad de origen se viene a enfrentar a sus mismas o peores condiciones de pobreza en la cual se ha ido, la cual huyó? Al tema de suicidios, pensamientos suicidios, porque el tema de la deuda es bastante fuerte, el cómo devolver la deuda que se obtuvo durante el viaje y no se pudo lograr esta parte del sueño americano. El cambio climático es otro factor que hace que las familias migren. Las familias que tienen producción, por estos cambios tan drásticos del calor, del sol y de la lluvia, hacen que pierdan sus producciones y por ende eso mismo los impulsa a migrar porque ya no tienen nada que ofrecerles a sus familias, el sustento, y pues toman la decisión de migrar. Insto a todos a la construcción de un buen vivir, empoderándonos, hombres y mujeres, niños, niñas y adolescentes, a nuestros derechos humanos.
So in her remarks, Delia mentioned the concept of buen vivir, or to live well. This is an indigenous concept throughout the hemisphere that is based on individual and collective action with an understanding of the lasting and interdependent relationship between the universe, nature, and humanity. It places a strong importance on the ethical and moral responsibility of environmental conservation and a society based on harmony, respect, and balance. I highlight this because part of empowering local communities to take the lead in the design and implementation of local initiatives and in addressing irregular migration is to understand and respect the cultural context, which in the Western Highlands of Guatemala means integrating Mayan practices and world vision. It also means having staff members and local partners that speak the Mayan languages and who are part of the cultural fabric. To effectively respond to community priorities, it is critical to engage local organizations that have the knowledge and experience working in the local context and who are trusted by local leaders. Building relationships with local organizations means listening to them and learning from them, and then being flexible and incorporating their feedback into programming. The process that I've just described of working with communities to find their own priorities and building peer-to-peer relationships with local organizations is an iterative and adaptive process, and this takes time. We're conditioned to want to see results quickly, but lasting and sustainable impact is not always fast. And this is how we should be looking at addressing irregular migration and the way we need to be working in high-out migration contexts. Communities and local organizations understand their context, the drivers, and the solutions. We need to build relationships and empower our partners. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. And I want to just open the floor very briefly because with the video, there was a little bit of a delay. But I did have one question that I wanted to ask you, Sarah, and then I will look at the chat to see if we have more. As we talk about shifting power, which is the overarching theme for SID, and in the context of irregular migration, why do you feel that this approach that you have for Tejiendo Paz is successful?
So like I mentioned, for results to be sustainable, they really need to be locally owned. And particularly when we're talking about social conflict or irregular migration, we're looking at patterns and cycles that can go back generations. There's issues related to historic discrimination and, like Delia mentioned, lack of access to basic services and opportunities. So when a project comes in with predetermined solutions, they may work in the short term, but the reality is that they're unlikely to be sustainable once a project ends if there isn't local ownership and local communities haven't been involved. I would also add that these issues are nuanced. Decision-making processes need to happen with the people impacted, in our case, by social conflict. The Western Highlands is a small geographical area, but it's incredibly diverse. So in the case of our project, a natural resource conflict in the Ixchil area may play out differently than in Huehuetenango. We can't assume that the response would be exactly the same. And I think that this applies as well to irregular migration.
Great. And in the interest of time, I am going to move over to our next speaker, who Wendy Delgado-Fernandez, who will be talking with us about her work in El Salvador.
Buenos días, un gusto saludarles.
Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to greet you from El Salvador, from ARDEMUSA. It's a pleasure to be here in this forum and share with you the work that we've done and the results that we have had here in El Salvador. ARDEMUSA is an organization of women that work through different strategies, the solutions to break the gap between the men and the women in our country. And as a result of this strategy, and thanks to the cooperation of SID, we have managed in 2022, in June specifically, to start the project to strengthen the economic strength of the women. This project or this initiative rises as a response to women who are ventured, who saw that their work was in crisis, that were put in place to prevent the COVID-19 pandemic. Of course, this affected the entire population, but it's true that in the case of the women, it evidenced and exacerbated the economic crisis in which they already had found themselves. And that's because the pandemic found women in unemployment or precarious employment that obliged them to live and survive to solve just their daily needs. According to the Ministry of Economy, 69% of the women occupy the informal enterprises in El Salvador. This sector did not receive any policy or aid during and after the pandemic. Along with this, there was a resounding departure of women in the labor force because they had to leave their jobs and their ventures and able to take care of their needs in their homes. And as we know, that usually falls on the women. This is, of course, created a greater vulnerability for them and for their families. In this sense, the project Bella created a better autonomy for the women, finding a way to support the women, finding solutions for entrepreneurs to help their businesses. Thanks to a study that had been done by the social organizations, specifically the Feminine Collective, who were associates in this project, and ARDEMUSA, we were able to prove that the beauty salons are one of the areas in which women undertake more frequently, and therefore many families depend on these ventures. We also discovered that these businesses were hit hardest during the confinement and the economic crisis, because they had to close during the quarantine, not only because of that, but once we returned to normality, these ventures saw that they were diminished, their needs were diminished because the population had to prioritize other types of services. In this sense, this project really benefited women who were owners of beauty salons who did not have the money necessary to be able to grow their business, nor did they have the knowledge that they needed in terms of administration, technology, and marketing that would have allowed them to survive during this crisis. We also noticed that in this study, most of the women expressed that one of the reasons why they had seen that they were limited in the moment that they wanted to survive with their business, it was because of the strong mental crisis as well. Also because of many situations of violence that they had lived through during confinement. And of course, they lost their motivation and desire to grow their business. In this case, this project started in June of 2020, which lasted 5 months. This first phase has as a main process to form the women in terms of aesthetic techniques, innovative, that would allow them to have the necessary use to have a better profit margin that would allow them their companies to survive. And then we also taught them to administer and how to sell their services. Parallel to this process, the women went through a process of sensibilization and empowerment in terms of mental health and self-care and empowerment economically. The results of this first stage was incredible. All of the women that started this project, they ended it successfully with a high participation. On top of that, the women informed us that that their sales had raised 30% during those first 5 months. And this was thanks to the formation they did in terms of digital marketing, especially using free tools on social networks to sell their services. So the digital gap is a reality, and it affects women in different areas of their lives, but especially in the labor market when it comes to entrepreneurship, which requests innovation in order to survive and stand out with their ventures. When we started with this project, the women didn't have social networks. They didn't have a page of Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok where they could advertise and sell their services. By the end of the first stage of 5 months, all the women had pages to promote their services, and also thanks to the knowledge of administration and practice that they received, all the women were able to promote offers of their business that allowed them to bring in more clients and at a price that allowed them to be more needed. And this was the perfect combination for the sales go up in their business. When we finished this first stage, they received supplies and equipment to the beauty salon so that the women could have these entrepreneurs could have these tools that they were lacking in because of the lack of capital, so that they could grow their business and complement it with these technical knowledges that they learned. Thank you to the exit of this first stage of 5 months. We are able to put in the second phase in 2023, and that's about to finish now in June, to tell them that this first phase, the second phase, had as an objective to continue strengthening and sensibilizing and the empowerment of the women, because it was one of the principal things that they showed during the first phase that had been fundamental for them to be able to finish successfully this project, but also to be able to grow their business. In that sense, we continued this process of resilience, and also we continued to teach them an innovative techniques of aesthetic techniques, which they were not able to access beforehand. So in this second phase, they were able to learn about hair-to-hair techniques that allowed them at a low cost of inversion to have higher gains. And part of the result of the second phase, one of the results in this phase that was really motivated us the most and made us more excited is that the women created a network where they work today to continue enforcing and empowering each one of their members, but at the same time to share the information and the knowledge that they received with other women in the country. In that sense, to tell them that the women that participate in this project said it was incredibly important for them that in this process they were able to identify leaders and enforce those leaders that today are women who organize the work of the network, and they work autonomously to be able to administer the supplies and their activities. One of the other successes in the second phase, many of the women told us that they were able to get out of that cycle of violence that didn't allow them to grow their business. They told us that many of them were able to use they were supposed to give the money that they earned to their family or to their partners, and they also were limited to the amount of time that they could work in their business, and therefore they were not motivated to continue. So part of this process, one of the things that was very important, it was to construct those, deconstruct those stereotypes that limit women and that maintain them in these cycles of violence, and allow them to have the economic empowerment so they could grow their businesses and face and reach those goals that we have in this country. Because in El Salvador, it's hard to be an entrepreneur in El Salvador, but for women even more, because they have to face the gaps that we all have. And to tell them that this project created a strategy that complemented the technical aspect, but also resilience, and to deconstruct these and to deconstruct. Thank you, Wendy.
For you, but I think what we'll do is actually I can put them together with my question for Adelina, so we can make sure to pass over and give the mic to Adelina so that she has enough time to have her talk, as well as to have videos that we're also going to play. Thank you so much for that amazing innovation in economic development and the outcomes of women's empowerment. And Adelina? Adelina, you are on mute.
Ay, perdón. Sí, buenos días a todos y todas. Un gusto estar compartiendo en este espacio. The Center for Human Development is an organization that prioritizes the work with political and for the youth in the mark of a strategic national in this way, we have constructed a model of work with the youth that fundamentally deals with two different fields. I'm going to move my camera because it's bothering the internet. It deals fundamentally two large fields or strategies. As a model, what really we decided to do is to accompany the construction of the political voice of the youth, dealing with their sector, focused specifically on human rights. A claim not just at the local level, but also at the municipal and also at the national level. How did we come about this? We advanced this model fundamentally with two large components: the component of installation of skills related to knowledge, and a component to organize the youth at the local level to the national level. As a term of knowledge, that what has it to educate the youth in leadership, organization, and participation, and political participation. Human rights fundamentally in the view of skills, the monitoring of violations of human rights violations, their own and as well as for the population. We have those mechanisms, the School for Management of Political. We also dealt with what signifies the construction of local agendas, local, municipals, national, and that it has empowered definitely the youth that we work with to fundamentally is national, but from the point of view of CDH, we dealt with a vision and focus on the indigenous population. But for all this work, in reality, we have alliances that have helped us build these processes. local and as a level of organization. One of those aspects that are fundamental of this process is to the training of the youth. And we can see that it has definitely a factor of change, education, with a program that allows scholarships that we have proposed and that we have sustained in the last years, in a few years. And this factor of education, it's what has allowed the youth to construct, to look for, to explore alternatives and possibilities connected with education at the level to Washington. They have gone and come back, and they have brought back their knowledge at the level that the communicates youth. It has been something very positive in the view of the future, positive for the people, for the youth that are in all of these processes, building, scaling, but also sharing. From the point of view of articulating this in a social way, the construction of a platform for the youth at the local level, community, municipal, region, to the national level. We can see in this image all the youth, they share and they get together. And in this sense, what we have done, have scaled at the local level to the national level, are networks of the youth from the ages of 12 to 30 years. But also working with the indigenous communities, we have a difference in terms of their indigenous motivation. What does that mean? We still have to work with the counseling at the local level to the national level. In that sense, we have reached the first step from the local level to the national level, working with agendas from the youth to the national level. And definitely, it has made them agents of change and to be involved in their local politics or the national politics, but as well, it has accompanied so that they can work with the legal fields. The last experience is connected to the problems that are here at the national level. They're in all the spaces because they have been involved in the processes of the incidents of, definitely, we believe that with all our efforts of education and education, working with the vision, with the political space, civic and national, we believe that is a model where it builds from one point to the other point, because we have started this initiative since 2002. And for us, it's very important from the point of view of what it gives back to the youth. Is for the present and the future of Honduras. I'm very happy to be a part of this experience. Here we have the second part of our presentation. Thank you very much.
The formation that we received in this institution has been an important tool in order to work the problem of the youth. And in this way, develop our capabilities, leadership capabilities, in order to work with the youth from different communities. Besides that, there's also spaces as youth we have been able to empower ourselves and also work for the development of our country, and this way, directly and indirectly, avoid the loss of gray matter. It's this compromise that we have with the communities and the way we can change our reality to improve the conditions of the whole community, from sensibilization and training and motivation and in multiple spaces, the youth, the communities in the society, we can construct that citizenship, participatory citizenship, through the national spaces, departmental and municipalities. We need this to construct proposals to face these structural problems in our communities. And we can see opportunities like the capacity to learn and to be positive in front of our reality as a window, because we're conscious that we know that the community that we deserve, the country that we deserve, we have to sit down and construct these solutions that allow us to live in freedom and dignity.
Thank you all. And I want to just to do a brief overview just to pull us all together, and then we can open the floor for a few minutes that remain for this discussion. But I hope that you all feel, as I do, that the three panelists really bring to the fore the idea of shifting the power and the focus and the decision-making to the communities where we're working. So within the Western Highlands, we see a participatory process. Within El Salvador, we've seen a women-led, women understood from a gender perspective of how to overcome the realities of economic disadvantage. And then also with SID-US, we see that youth are leading their way and building their networks and moving towards being decision makers and influencing their future. And I hope that really brings together the how, a key portion of the how it would be that we should go about unpacking and addressing issues of irregular migration in these various areas. My one question that I had for Wendy that I will ask after, but we seem to have a very interesting question that I believe would be for Wendy in the chat, and it's from Luis Villatoro. He put it in Spanish. I'm going to translate it to the best of my ability in English, which is, what other opportunities apart from employment have you identified to generate a sense of rootedness? Have there been other opportunities that women that women need or have expressed need for in the municipalities? You're muted, Wendy.
Gracias. Si me pueden repetir la pregunta en español, por favor, para tener clara la...
Sí. Está en el chat, pero ¿qué otras oportunidades distintas a la generación de empleo han identificado para generar arraigo? ¿Qué otras oportunidades demandan las mujeres en los municipios?
Gracias. Precisamente el tema de prevención de violencia.
It's a theme of violence, and besides the economic situation, it's another theme that the women that want to migrate, many of the women that were part of this project identified this point as one of the reasons why what stopped them from being economically in a good place with their businesses. And they also told us that once they were able to get out of the cycle of violence through this process of empowerment and the rights, they were able to be more, have more success and be more motivated in their life and to get to more of their goals and to realize more of their goal. And what I'm seeing, So I think, Adelina, you're the one that you were talking about being in tela, and the participants want to know, what does that mean when you were talking about that? I'm sorry, what was the question? So you mentioned being in tela, and what does that mean in when you were talking about that in your presentation? Yes, to be in tela. I don't know, maybe they didn't understand. Maybe it was Wendy. Maybe Wendy said that it does. I think that I mentioned it in the context of being actualized. I think I mentioned in terms of the social networks that when the women started the project, they didn't have that. But at the end of the project, they already had their social networks, and it was something present for them. In that context, I think is where I may have used it. Thank you.
Yeah. So I want to just thank everyone who's participated with us today and all of the speakers. I believe that these are just some very important examples of the how in terms of working on issues of irregular migration within Central America. And I do hope that you all go to the Creatives a virtual exhibit on the SID platform. You're welcome to look at the center's research that I very briefly mentioned at the beginning of our discussion. And of course, Wendy and Adelina are also very open to being connected with over the course of the conference as well. Thank you all so much for joining us.
Gracias. Gracias.